A police cruiser aggressively boxed in a black man struggling with a baby stroller in an affluent suburb. The officers smirked, thinking they'd caught a criminal in the act. They had no idea the man they were about to handcuff was the Honorable David Thompson, the county's presiding family court judge. The crisp, late October wind whipped through the manicured streets of Oak Ridge Estates, an affluent, tree-lined suburb where perfectly trimmed hedges hid sprawling multi-million-dollar homes. It was a Tuesday afternoon, quiet and entirely undisturbed, save for the rhythmic hum of a landscaping crew a few blocks over. 56-year-old David Thompson stood next to his charcoal-gray Audi Q7 battling the final boss of modern grandparenting, an overly complicated, stubbornly jammed upper baby stroller. He was dressed for a rare day off. Gone were the tailored charcoal suits and the heavy black silk robe that defined his professional life. Instead, David wore a faded gray Georgetown University hoodie, a pair of worn-in navy sweatpants, and scuffed New Balance sneakers. In the back seat of the Audi, securely fastened into her car seat, was his 8-month-old granddaughter Chloe. She was currently voicing her extreme displeasure at being stationary, letting out short, high-pitched shrieks. I know, sweetheart, Grandpa's almost got it," David muttered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He wrestled with the folding mechanism of the stroller frame, trying to collapse it to fit into the trunk. He had just finished a morning visit with his daughter Sarah, who lived in the neighborhood, and was tasked with taking Chloe back to his place while Sarah attended a virtual job interview. Just as the stroller frame finally yielded with a satisfying click, the sharp, unmistakable chirp of a police siren pierced the quiet street. David didn't think much of it at first. He hoisted the heavy stroller frame into the trunk, but when he turned around, the reality of the situation washed over him in a wash of flashing red and blue lights. A local precinct Ford Explorer had pulled up at an aggressive angle, essentially boxing his Audi into the driveway's apron. 2 officers stepped out. The doors slammed shut in unison, the sound echoing sharply against the quiet suburban backdrop. The driver, Officer Brian Mitchell, was a 15-year veteran of the force. He had the thick, square-jawed build of a man who spent his off hours at a heavy-lifting gym, and his eyes were hidden behind dark, polarized Oakley sunglasses. His partner, Officer Tyler Reed, was fresh out of the academy, barely 23, with a nervous energy that made him constantly adjust the duty belt on his waist. "Step away from the vehicle," Mitchell commanded, his voice a flat, practiced bark. His right hand was already resting casually on the butt of his sidearm. David froze his hands, still resting on the edge of the open trunk. Decades in the legal system had taught him exactly how these encounters went. He knew the statistics. He knew the tragic stories that had crossed his own desk. He took a slow, deep breath, consciously regulating his heart rate. "Good afternoon, officers," David said, keeping his voice entirely neutral, devoid of both fear and aggression. "Is there a problem?" I said. "Step away from the vehicle," Mitchell repeated, closing the distance. He stopped about 10 feet away, giving himself plenty of reactionary space. Reed moved to the passenger side, flanking David, his hand nervously hovering near his taser. "My granddaughter is in the back seat," David explained, calmly taking one deliberate step back from the trunk, keeping his hands clearly visible in the brisk autumn air. "She's crying. I was just putting her stroller in the trunk so we can head home." Mitchell's jaw tightened. He looked David up and down, taking in the faded hoodie, the sweatpants, and the dark skin. Then he looked at the luxury SUV and finally at the sprawling stone facade house behind them. The math he was doing in his head was obvious, and it was deeply offensively flawed. "Whose vehicle is this?" Mitchell asked. "It's mine," David replied. "And whose house is this?" "My daughter's." Mitchell let out a short, cynical scoff. He hooked his thumbs into his duty belt. "Right. Your daughter's house. In Oak Ridge Estates. Look, buddy, we've had a string of residential burglaries in this sector over the past 3 weeks. Guys driving through in luxury cars looking like they belong, scoping out houses, snatching packages, testing doors. I assure you I am not scoping out houses," David said, his tone dropping an octave, a hint of the formidable courtroom presence beginning to bleed through his casual exterior. "If you'd like, I can ring the doorbell. My daughter is inside on a Zoom call, but I'm sure she'd be happy to verify." "Do not move toward that house," Mitchell snapped, unstrapping the retention holster on his firearm. The sound was a loud, sharp snap that made baby Chloe shriek louder from the back seat. "You are going to keep your hands exactly where they are." Officer Reed, looking slightly pale, finally spoke up. "Sir, do you have identification on you?" "My wallet is in the center console of the vehicle," David said, looking directly at the rookie. "I can retrieve it for you slowly, or you can retrieve it yourself. But I'd appreciate it if you lowered your voice. You're terrifying my granddaughter." Mitchell wasn't having it. The idea that a suspect was dictating the terms of the stop infuriated him. He marched forward, grabbing David roughly by the shoulder and spinning him around. "Hey!" David's voice boomed, sharp and authoritative, ringing with the kind of absolute command that usually silenced crowded courtrooms. But out here on the street, Mitchell held the gavel. "Put your hands on the vehicle. Spread your feet," Mitchell yelled, shoving David against the side of his own Audi. The metal was cold against David's cheek. Humiliation flared hot in his chest, followed immediately by a cold, calculating anger. He could see the curtain twitching in the house across the street. Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood gossip, was undoubtedly watching the scene unfold, assuming the worst about the black man pinned against a car in her pristine neighborhood. "You are making a profound mistake," Officer David said quietly, his cheek pressed to the glass of the rear passenger window. Inside, Chloe was wailing, her tiny face red with distress. "Shut up," Mitchell hissed, kicking David's feet further apart and beginning a rough, invasive pat-down of his sweatpants. "Reed, get the ID from the center console. Let's see who this guy really is." Officer Tyler Reed hesitated. He looked at David, who was offering zero physical resistance, and then at the crying infant in the back seat. The situation felt wrong to him. The man didn't act like a burglar caught in the act. He didn't have the twitchy, adrenaline-fueled panic of a criminal. He was perfectly still, exuding a quiet, terrifying patience. "Reed, move," Mitchell barked, pulling David's arms back and holding them in a painful grip. Reed quickly ducked into the driver's side of the Audi. He opened the center console and retrieved a worn, dark brown leather wallet. He hurried back around the front of the car, flipping the wallet open. "I got it," Reed said, pulling out the New York State driver's license. He looked at the name, then at the photo, then at the man pinned against the car. "Name is David L. Thompson. Address is out in Westlake." Mitchell scoffed again. Westlake was an affluent area, but not quite Oak Ridge Estates. "Westlake, huh? That's a long way from here, David." "What, the pickings weren't good enough in your own neighborhood?" David didn't answer. He was carefully memorizing Mitchell's badge number, his nameplate, the unit number on the cruiser, and the exact timestamp on the Audi's dashboard clock. He was building a mental docket. "Run him," Mitchell ordered, maintaining his grip on David's wrists. "Run for wants and warrants. See if our guy has a parole officer he forgot to mention." Reed unclipped the microphone attached to his shoulder epaulette. He depressed the button, the radio emitting a sharp, static click. Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo, requesting a 1029 on a David L. Thompson. Date of birth, August 14th, 1969. New York license number. Reed rattled off the alphanumeric sequence. Copy that. For Bravo. Stand by, the female dispatcher's voice crackled back through the speaker. For 2 agonizing minutes, the street was filled only with the sound of Chloe's frantic crying and the harsh, heavy breathing of Officer Mitchell. David remained perfectly still against the car. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was deeply sorrowful. He thought of all the young men who stood in his courtroom, men who didn't know the lawmen, who panicked in situations exactly like this, and men who ended up dead or incarcerated because of officers just like Brian Mitchell. The radio crackled back to life, but it wasn't the standard automated rundown of a clean record. The dispatcher's voice had dropped its usual monotone cadence. She sounded tense, urgent. For Bravo, this is dispatch. Confirming that name. Did you say David L. Thompson? Middle initial Lawrence Reed frowned, looking at the license again. Affirmative, dispatch. Middle name, Lawrence. Why, what do we have? There was a 5-second pause. When the dispatcher spoke again, her voice carried a clear, frantic warning. Unit 4. Bravo. Be advised. You need to immediately verify the individual's identity. The information attached to that driver's license flags the individual as a high-level county official. That is the Honorable David L. Thompson. He is the presiding chief judge of the county family court and a sitting superior court magistrate. The words echoed out of the radio speaker attached to Reed's chest. They hung in the crisp autumn air like a physical weight. Sitting superior court magistrate. For a second, the universe seemed to stop spinning. The wind died down. Even Chloe's crying seemed to momentarily fade into the background. Officer Mitchell's hands, which had been gripping David's wrists with the force of iron vices, suddenly went limp. It was as if he had grabbed a live power line, and the shock had paralyzed his motor functions. He stumbled backward, his polarized sunglasses slipping slightly down the bridge of his nose. Officer Reed looked like he was going to vomit. The blood drained from the rookie's face so fast, he looked practically translucent. He looked down at the driver's license in his trembling hand, staring at the small printed photo of the man they had just manhandled. Slowly, deliberately, David Thompson pushed himself off the side of the Audi. He didn't rush. He didn't make any sudden movements. He casually reached up and adjusted the collar of his faded Georgetown hoodie. He dusted off the sleeves. Then he turned around to face the 2 officers. The transformation was absolute. He was still wearing sweatpants and sneakers, but the aura radiating from him was pure, unadulterated authority. He stood up to his full 6'2" height, his shoulders squared, his dark eyes locking onto Mitchell with the kind of intense, piercing judgment that had made hardened defense attorneys stutter in his courtroom. Officer Mitchell, David said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the silence like a scalpel. My wrists are free. Am I still being detained? Mitchell opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. He looked at David, then down at his own hands, realizing the monumental career-ending magnitude of what he had just done. He had just assaulted, falsely detained, and racially profiled the highest-ranking judge in the district, a man who had the ear of the mayor, the chief of police, and the district attorney. No, Sir Mitchell finally stammered, his tough guy facade shattering into 1,000,000 pathetic pieces. No, Your Honor, there's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, David repeated, letting the word roll off his tongue slowly tasting the absurdity of it. He took a slow, measured step toward Mitchell. The officer reflexively took a step back. "You saw a black man in a neighborhood you decided he didn't belong in," David said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. "You didn't ask questions. You gave orders. You unholstered your weapon in the presence of an infant. You physically assaulted me, violated my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure, and ignored every protocol of de-escalation you were ever taught at the academy." Reed stood completely frozen, clutching the wallet like a lifeline. "Your Honor, there were reports of burglaries." David's gaze snapped to the rookie. "Officer Reed, if you speak before I give you permission, I will ensure that the ink on your academy diploma is the last thing you ever see in a law enforcement capacity. Do you understand me?" Reed clamped his mouth shut and nodded frantically. David turned his attention back to Mitchell, who was now sweating profusely despite the October chill. "I deal with the consequences of men like you every single day," Mitchell David said quietly. "I see families torn apart. I see young boys pushed into the system because an officer with a badge and a bias decided to escalate a traffic stop into a tragedy. Today you picked the wrong man." David reached out his hand, palm up. He didn't look at Reed. "My wallet." "Now." Reed scrambled forward, placing the leather wallet gently into the judge's palm as if he were handling a live grenade. "I'm going to turn around, open my car door, and comfort my terrified granddaughter, David," instructed his voice, echoing with finality. "You two are going to return to your cruiser. You are not going to leave this street. You are going to call your watch commander and your precinct captain, and you are going to tell them to meet you at this exact address. Because we are going to have a very long, very painful conversation about the future of your careers." David didn't wait for a response. He turned his back on them, the ultimate display of fearlessness and contempt, and opened the rear door of his SUV. As he leaned in to unbuckle the crying baby, lifting her gently into his arms and hushing her against his chest, the two police officers stood in the driveway, paralyzed by the sheer weight of their monumental mistake. They had tried to play God on the street, completely unaware that they had just pulled over the man who held the keys to their purgatory. Inside Unit 4 Bravo, the silence was suffocating. The cruiser's engine idled, pumping warm air into a cabin that suddenly felt like a tomb. Officer Brian Mitchell gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white, staring blankly through the windshield at the charcoal Audi. Beside him, Officer Tyler Reed kept his eyes glued to his own lap, his stomach churning with a nauseating mix of adrenaline and dread. They had made the call. The radio transmission requesting the precinct captain and the watch commander to the scene had been met with a prolonged, stunned silence from dispatch, followed by a terse confirmation. Out on the driveway, the front door of the sprawling stone house swung open. 30-year-old Sarah Thompson stepped out onto the porch. She was dressed in a sharp navy blouse and slacks, holding a half-empty mug of coffee, her post-interview relief evaporating the second she saw the flashing lights boxing in her father's car. Dad Sarah yelled, dropping her mug. It shattered on the porch, spilling dark coffee across the slate. She sprinted down the driveway. "Dad, what happened? Are you okay?" "Is Chloe?" "We are perfectly fine, Sarah," David said. His voice was a soothing balm, completely devoid of the sharp edge he had just used on the officers. He stood near the open back door of the SUV, rocking a now calm Chloe against his shoulder. There was just a slight miscommunication with the local patrol. "Nothing for you to worry about." Sarah stopped her eyes darting from her father's pristine, calm demeanor to the two officers sitting frozen in the cruiser. She saw the way David's Georgetown hoodie was slightly bunched at the shoulder, the faint red mark on his neck where Mitchell's forearm had pressed against him during the rough pat-down. Her shock instantly morphed into a fierce, protective anger. "Did they touch you?" she demanded, marching toward the police cruiser. Sarah stopped. David commanded, his tone firm enough to halt her in her tracks. "I have this handled. I need you to take Chloe inside. Go back to your house, lock the door, and do not come back out until I tell you." Sarah hesitated, looking at her father. She knew that look. It was the same look he wore when he was about to deliver a ruling that would alter the course of a family's life. She nodded carefully, taking the baby from his arms, and retreated into the house. 5 minutes later, the quiet suburban street was shattered by the roar of 2 unmarked black Ford Explorers tearing around the corner. They parked haphazardly, tires screeching against the curb. Captain Thomas Caldwell practically leapt out of the lead vehicle. Caldwell was a seasoned political survivor, a man who spent more time at city council fundraisers than in the precinct. He was sweating right through his pressed white uniform shirt. Behind him was Sergeant Miller, a grizzled watch commander who looked like he had just swallowed a lemon. Caldwell trotted up the driveway, offering a wide, incredibly forced smile. He extended his hand before he was even within reaching distance. David. "My God, what a colossal mess," Caldwell said, his voice dripping with an agonizingly fake camaraderie. "I was in a budget meeting when dispatch patched through. Let's get this sorted out, huh?" Just a huge misunderstanding by a couple of overzealous guys on the beat. David didn't take the captain's hand. He stood with his arms crossed over his chest, his expression carved from granite. "It is Judge Thompson, Captain Caldwell," David corrected, his voice echoing in the quiet street. "And if you ever refer to an unconstitutional detention, an armed threat in the presence of an infant, and a racially motivated physical assault as a colossal mess, again I will have the district attorney subpoena your internal communications before the sun goes down." Caldwell's hand slowly dropped to his side. The forced smile vanished. He realized instantly that this wasn't a situation he could smooth over with handshakes and backroom promises. Judge Thompson, Caldwell said, swallowing hard, "I apologize. Please walk me through exactly what happened." "I was loading my granddaughter's stroller into my vehicle," David stated, looking directly at Mitchell, who had finally emerged from the cruiser, looking pale and defeated. "Your officers initiated a stop without probable cause. They did not ask for my name. They did not inquire about my business. Officer Mitchell unholstered his sidearm. He threw me against my vehicle and unlawfully searched my person. He assumed that because I am a black man in Oak Ridge Estates wearing sweatpants, I must be a burglar." "Sir, we've had a string of," Mitchell started to say, taking a desperate step forward. Silence. David's voice cracked like a whip. Even Captain Caldwell flinched. David turned back to the captain. "They ran my ID only after assaulting me. If my name were John Doe, if I were a plumber, a teacher, or a teenager walking home from school, I would be in the back of that cruiser right now with a fabricated resisting arrest charge. Or worse, I'd be in a body bag." "Judge, I assure you there will be disciplinary action," Caldwell stammered, pulling out a notepad he didn't intend to use. "A suspension, retraining." "Do not patronize me," Thomas David interrupted, stepping into the captain's personal space. "I know how this department works. You will give him 2 weeks of paid administrative leave. Let the union rep bury the complaint and put him back on the street by Thanksgiving." "That is not going to happen today." David pointed a long, accusatory finger at Mitchell. "I want his badge. I want his gun. I want an internal affairs investigation opened immediately. And I want a full review of his body cam footage from the last 48 months," David demanded, laying out his terms with the precision of a legal brief. Because a man who acts with this level of reckless, biased impunity does not do it just once. He has done this before. The only difference is that today, he did it to someone who can fight back. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely unprecedented in the county's history. Judge David Thompson did not let the incident fade into the 24-hour news cycle. Instead of calling a press conference to grandstand, he wielded his power exactly where it mattered, behind the closed doors of the justice system. He filed a formal, meticulously documented civil rights complaint with the Department of Justice, bypassing the local precinct's Internal Affairs Division entirely. The investigation yielded a massive dark twist that sent shockwaves through the local government. When federal investigators, pressured by the mayor's office and the chief judge, pulled Officer Brian Mitchell's historical files, they discovered a horrifying pattern. Over his 15-year career, Mitchell had been the subject of 11 separate excessive force and racial profiling complaints. All of them had occurred in affluent neighborhoods. All of them involved minority citizens, and every single one had been quietly dismissed by a former union representative who was now sitting on the city council. The discovery was a powder keg. It wasn't just a bad stop. It was a systemic cover-up. Faced with a federal civil rights lawsuit and the wrath of the entire judicial bench, the police department caved. Officer Brian Mitchell was stripped of his badge and terminated without a pension. The local district attorney, eager to save his own political career, opened a grand jury investigation into Mitchell for criminal deprivation of rights under color of law. But David's justice was not solely punitive. It was incredibly calculated. A week after the incident, Officer Tyler Reed was summoned to the county courthouse. He arrived in his Class A uniform, trembling as he was escorted into the private chambers of the presiding judge. David sat behind his massive mahogany desk, dressed in his black judicial robes. He let the young rookie stand at attention for a long, agonizing minute before speaking. "You hesitated." "Officer Reed," David said softly, closing a file folder on his desk. "When your partner assaulted me, I watched your face. You knew it was wrong. You knew it violated protocol. But you did nothing. I was scared." Your Honor, Reed admitted, his voice cracking. "He was my training officer. I didn't know how to stop him." "Fear is a human response," David replied, his eyes piercing through the young man. "But complacency is a choice. You carry a badge and a gun, son. That grants you the power of life and death over the citizens you swore to protect. If you cannot find the courage to stand up to a bully in your own patrol car, you have no business wearing that uniform." Reed looked down, tears welling in his eyes. "Am I fired, sir? No," David said, leaning back in his leather chair. "I spoke with Captain Caldwell. You are being placed on 6 months of desk duty. During that time, you will volunteer 40 hours a week at the East Side Community Center's Youth Outreach Program. You are going to learn about the people you police. You are going to look them in the eye when you don't have a taser on your hip. If you complete that, you can return to the street." "Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Thank you," Reed whispered, utterly overwhelmed by the grace he had just been shown. Dismissed. The incident at Oak Ridge Estates catalyzed a massive shift in the county. Judge Thompson leveraged the public outcry to mandate sweeping department-wide reforms, including mandatory third-party implicit bias training and stricter body cam compliance policies. David didn't do it for himself. He did it for the teenager walking home in a hoodie, the father changing a tire on the side of a dark road, and the countless individuals who didn't have a magistrate's title to shield them from a biased badge. He took a moment of profound humiliation and forged it into a permanent shield for his community, proving that true power isn't about avoiding the fire. It's about using the flames to light the way for others. Conclusion. This story is a powerful reminder that true justice requires both accountability and the courage to demand systemic change. Judge Thompson used his position not just for personal vindication, but to protect those who don't have a voice against deeply rooted biases. If this story moved you or sparked a conversation about accountability and reform, please hit the like button. Share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories.